Okay, great. So, to start off with, could you just state your name, pronouns, degree, and your year?
Yeah. Ben Jorgensen, Benjamin Jorgensen. I'm a he, and my degree is Bachelor of Arts, majoring in politics.
Yep, and your year?
And my year, third year.
Yeah. Do you have a campaign manager, or are you currently running with any political factions?
I'm running with a group of students on campus. I do have a supportive team around me, and I'm very thankful for them.
Yeah. Do you have a formal branding name for them, or just
No, just a group of very supportive friends.
Great.
Yeah.
Are you currently a member of any political faction or party?
Yeah, so in the past I have worked with the Liberals on campus. It's something that I'm not going to shy away from. I think it's important that there's a contest of ideas here on campus. It's important for students to explore the different political realms of thought. And so I have in the past run with Liberals and helped them out on campus. So, yeah.
Alright, so I'm just going to ask 5 questions. They're not meant to be open-ended. Just to gauge your understanding of the Senate and the organisation that you're wishing to join. So my first question is, could you name as many of the current fellows of the Senate as you can and their positions, if you can?
Right. I've done my research. There are 15 board members on the board. I can't tell you exactly who, but it is the Chancellor, the Vice Chancellor as well. And I can name the 2 student fellows. I think that's important. That's Lachlan Finch, who's postgraduate, and the undergraduate fellows, County Student Fellows.
Yeah, could you name any of the others?
Sorry?
So you mentioned the Chancellor and the Vice Chancellor, for example. Could
Yes.
you provide names for them?
Yeah, so Mark Scott.
Yeah, and he is the Vice Chancellor or the Chancellor?
Vice Chancellor.
Okay, sure. How many times does the Senate convene each year?
I think it's every 2 months. So it's quite a few times a year. Yeah.
Could you provide an exact number or estimate?
I think it's 7 to 8.
Okay, cool. How many Senate committees are there?
12, I'd like to think.
Okay. What is the name of the legislation that governs the powers and responsibilities of the Senate?
I've read it. The regulations for this election is in there. I can't tell you the exact name. I know that it exists and it is separate from the student charter.
Okay. If you can, what are some of the Senate's primary responsibilities according to this legislation?
It's governance and oversight of the entire university.
Okay.
And across all of its institutions. Yeah.
Great. So I wanted to ask a little bit about your experience. So, and your view of the Senate.
Yeah.
So in your view, what is the role of the Senate, and I suppose by extension, the student fellow?
Yeah. Well, I think the role of the Senate is to set out the strategic plan for the future in the years coming, and it's really important that as a governance body, and the highest governance body here at the university, they take a role that is to develop students and students who are looking to come to USyd. So their role, I guess, is one of management. They're definitely not here, they're not academics, they're not our teachers, they are management, so they're here to manage the university. But their role, I guess, is making sure that we get the education that we deserve.
Yeah, and the role of the student fellow, in your view?
The role of the student fellow is to voice the views of students, end of story. They're there to make sure that the student voice is heard, and I've spent time on campus for the past 3 years in clubs and societies as well, so I'd like to think that I know what students like here on campus, and they're there, they have an equal vote to the rest of the board, so it's really important that they negotiate and fight with the rest of the board to get, the best outcomes for students.
Yeah, great. So you just mentioned there that you've had some involvement in clubs and societies.
Yeah.
So could you provide, I guess, an outline of that experience as well as any other experience that you think is relevant to this role?
Yeah, no, for sure. So I just start with, I've run a lot of campaigns on campus for student leadership positions such as SRC and USU. So I've been involved with a lot of students on campus through that way, and I think it's important that we get good representatives and student representatives into those positions to make sure that we get the best outcomes. As well as I've been heavily involved with the Student Arts Society, which is the biggest society here on campus. So I started with them in first year as first year officer, and then moved on to being ethno-cultural officer.
So what motivated you to run for student?
Oh, I might also add that I dabbled in on the executives of Mixed Stock and Puzzle Stock as well.
Great. So what motivated you to run for Student Fellow?
What motivated me? Well, students motivated me. But at the same time, I'm not going to sit here and lie. It's definitely a great opportunity for myself, and it's also a great opportunity for my peers as well. So I'd like to think that, what motivated me was twofold. One, it was my, I guess, initial desire to, seize this opportunity when I could, and also the other side of that is for me to give back. So as I've just mentioned, that I've spoken a lot about my involvement on campus for the past 3 years, and so I think it's about time for me, coming sort of near the end of my degree, to give back to the university that has given me so much.
So how would you describe your personal politics, if you could, I guess, articulate that in 1 or 2 sentences?
Yeah, for sure. I'd like to think that I'm centre-right. I'm not going to shy away from that. I am quite progressive in my social views, but when it comes to economics, I do lean to the right.
In your view, how do you think this will affect your role as Student Fellow, if it will?
Yeah, exactly. So I don't think it will affect my role. I've been out there for the past few days listening to students, and over the past 3 years. I think it's important to represent the views of all students. It's not, I don't think my political, I guess, persuasion is going to affect that. My political persuasion will inform the strategy in which I put forward into the future, but it won't affect my ability to represent students and what their views are and what their needs are as well here at the uni.
Yeah, sure. So, in your view, to what extent do you think the Senate should be a political body?
A political body?
Yeah.
Not very at all. I mean, they should really stand neutral, because what makes this university so great is the contest of ideas. It's what furthers, our education, furthers our political thought. It's really important to nurture an environment where everyone from all walks of life and all across the political spectrum can come together and really have those debates and have those important conversations, because at the end of the day we all have the same end goal in mind. We want a better future for all of ourselves and our families and friends, but we might just have different ways of understanding of how to get there and different strategies.
Sure. Okay, so I wanted to ask a bit about your policies.
Yep.
So, you mentioned, this is according to your website, by the way.
Yep.
You have a policy about reviewing Prop DU.
Yep.
So this was a policy that I think the previous Student Fellows ran on, but it did not eventuate. We haven't seen any updates or any progress from them over the last 2 years that they've been on the Senate. My question is, how do you plan to differentiate yourself, and if you have any plans to, like practical plans to actually implement this?
Yeah, well, I think it starts with consultation, and just over the past 3 years, and from my experience with friends and just speaking to fellow peers as well, we all don't love Prop DU. We don't love, sitting in it. To be honest, we don't like sitting at home and having all of our personal space invaded. I can't speak to what the previous Senate Fellows have promised and what they have delivered, but at the same time, I'll do everything in my power to make sure that I negotiate and make sure that that point is heard on the board.
Right, sure. So you also have a policy on increasing feedback loops. This is a routine proposal that we have seen from many previous candidates. However, the Senate, I think you can argue, it does remain to be this largely opaque body that average students don't really understand. So for example, minutes aren't available online. You have to email them directly, and if you do email them, they don't, like a lot of that is redacted. And the SRC council meetings, so the student undergraduate fellow does receive an automatic invitation to every single council meeting. However, this has been underutilized by the current undergraduate fellow. So my question is, how do you plan to increase these feedback loops? And I suppose if you plan to make use of the existing feedback loops a bit better.
Yeah, so I'll start with making a commitment to doing my absolute very best to attend each and every SRC meeting. Over the past few years, even this year, not being an SRC, I have made an effort to come to SRC meetings and voice the opinions of my peers. So it's something that I think is extremely important. I can't be a representative without listening to students. That's my primary job. I'm not going to know their views if I don't listen to them. And so increasing feedback loops also extends beyond that. I think it also extends to faculty and how we engage with faculty. So in previous, we've had faculty touch points that we no longer have, and those were like online websites where you could directly contact people within the faculty. Everything's now centralized, so it's becoming even more difficult to do that. And so when I say increase student feedback loops, it's not only the survey that happens at the end of each semester, but it's being able to access the right contacts that you need in either the faculty or in management to get the answers that you want.
Yeah, sure. So I guess a follow-up to that, how do you plan to work with other student representative organisations such as the SRC and USU if elected?
I think we would have a very constructive relationship with each other. My plan moving forward, if elected, would be firstly to reach out to them and see if there's a time that we can meet on a bi-monthly basis where we can talk about what their plans are, what my plans are, and how we can work constructively together to deliver outcomes for everybody that's across the three institutions, because I realise how much the USU and the SRC support students.
Sure. So you also have a policy on viewing special cons. Let me just double check. So fixing the special considerations process. You've cited with the new automated system, students do not have direct contact to help them navigate with their applications. So correct me if I'm wrong, but this statement seems to imply that the new automated system no longer provides direct contact as opposed to the previous system. I guess that's the first part of my question. Could you clarify if that's what you meant?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
So follow up to that. So how do you plan to, I guess, fix this process, such as, reviewing the backlogs, given there's a huge volume of applications at most instances?
Yeah. And I think you said it, it's those backlogs which are the problem, and it's the problems for how long it takes to get the response that you need. And I do know that it is automated, but it's not necessarily automated, if that makes sense. So the problem is with those backlogs, it's with a plan moving forward, it's how can we get more people in to help, or who can we create a role where there is a direct contact that students can just email and get a response straight away on the status of their application, or how their application is being affected by such processes, or if there is a backlog. There is not even a notice or anything like that saying it might take X amount of days to get a response.
Yeah, so what does that direct contact look like for you?
For me, it looks like a role, it needs to be advertised, it needs to be a role that's advertised, and it needs to be something similar to our academic advisors. So, and that's something as well that I'm committed to fixing. It's something like having a similar person to the academic advisors, or even the academic advisors themselves taking this on, being able to be more present with students. And how it is currently is the only time I've ever been able to engage with my academic advisor was on orientation day, and they put their phone number and email up on the screen, and if you've missed it, you've missed it. You don't really, it's so hard to navigate the university website to find out who your academic advisor is and who you can reach out to for that help.
Sure. So you also have a policy on reviewing late discontinuation failed considerations.
Yep.
So the university already has an existing policy or a procedure in place, which is the late discontinuation under special circumstances. So my question is, in what ways, if you find that this existing procedure is lacking, in what ways are they lacking, and in what ways do you want to see it improved? Right.
So I have quite a few friends who have spoken to me about this, and so basically what they've said to me is that they've put in applications. It's obviously taken them, for starters, a while to be approved, but there are compassionate reasons that they had, such as their partner's family going through some tough times, and they were there to support them, but however that wasn't considered as a special reason to be given that board that. So essentially what it is making increasing the catchment in what is considered.
Right.
Yeah.
Sure. I wanted to ask about, so you mentioned fixing the student-to-teacher ratio.
Yep.
And also reducing the use of recycled lectures where possible.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that these policies are related to the NTEU's current campaign for working conditions?
I'm not too familiar with that campaign, but it would be extremely constructive if it was aligned in that way, and that way we could both put pressure on management to get the outcomes that we would like.
Right. So do you plan to work with the NTEU to resolve these particular?
Yep. I'm committed to speaking with them and hearing their views and sharing my plan with them.
Sure. So I suppose aside from talking to the NTEU, what are some tangible ways do you plan to address these things?
These things as in?
So the student-to-teacher ratio and the recycled lectures.
Right. So it comes from a governance perspective, and when speaking on the board and speaking at meetings, I would voice that, recycled lectures aren't beneficial to students. We are at a multi-million-dollar institution, and we pay huge fees for a degree that is here to educate us and should be educating us in the time and in the current, zeitgeist in which we live. So it's really, really important that, we put an end to recycled lectures. There's so much new information happening, and there's so much new information out there that will better help us understand the world around us. And being a politics student, I see the beauty and the importance of case studies from the past, but I think it's also very important to make us work ready to be able to, have case studies from very more recent times and even current times. There's a lot going on geopolitically. I think it's really important that we discuss those things. I've only had one class in my whole politics degree. Don't know if you know our contemporary issues, where we explored the current day issues. But the rest of the classes are looking at some examples that date back, hundreds of years.
So you just mentioned there that it has to come from governance that these issues are resolved. Could you be more specific on which level of governance you think that?
I think it's the Senate board working with the faculty boards and the academic boards as well.
Yeah.
Everyone needs to work together to really get the outcomes, but it does come from the top down.
Yeah, sure. Just about time. I've got two more questions on policies. So you also have a policy about reviewing staff allocations.
Yep.
What do you think, in your view, what's the scope of this review and why is it necessary?
I think the scope of the review is seeing how much SAF money is going back to students and how much students are benefiting from their SAF fee. I think it's really important that as students we pay this one-off fee every semester, that we get the student services and essentially social life that we deserve and expect here at uni. It currently is very good, but I think we can do better.
Sure. So I suppose, I guess I'm going to try to re-ask that why is it necessary question. In your view, do you think there are certain organisations that deserve more staff allocation, or there are certain organisations that deserve less staff allocation?
I don't think so. I think it's based on the outcomes for students and how much an organisation can have create those outcomes for students, that they should be not rewarded but given that staff allocation.
Sure. Okay. So in some of your online campaign messages, you described yourself as a staunch student advocate, and in your policy platform, you've also referenced the need to fight when it counts and negotiate to get the best outcomes for students. So my question is, what will your approach to negotiations with university management be?
My approach is don't hold back. I mean, it's a big responsibility to be on that board of 15 who essentially make some of, the final decisions and the big decisions that affect the future of our education here at university. So I don't think, it's a big responsibility, and so I wouldn't take that lightly, and I would fight tooth and nail to get the outcomes for students.
So are you positioning yourself as more of an activist representative for students on the Senate?
I wouldn't present myself as an activist, but someone who is going to be an undergraduate fellow to Senate that understands them, that understands their needs, who has listened to them, and will fight and negotiate with the others on the board to get the best outcomes for students.
Sure. I wanted to ask, so a recent ONI investigation has also revealed some concerning details about the spending habits of the university executive.
Yeah.
Fabian might be able to provide specific numbers, but the figures I have here are, for example, $12,000 on taxis, membership fees to exclusive boys clubs, and more than $2,000 on business flights. As a Senate fellow, you will have some say in approving the university's budgets. How do you plan to address this if elected?
Budget allocation needs to be within reason and justifiable. I think that some of their spending habits are a little bit, I would say, not irresponsible, but also not necessarily justified. There's not too much transparency besides the receipts, so we don't actually know if, personally, we can't necessarily properly justify if it was for university business, but I think it is important that those on the board are able to attend the meetings that they need to attend, and they also need to reach out to the people and partners that we need to reach out to get the best outcomes for students. So I think their spending can definitely be reined in, and that can definitely be put towards students.
Sure. I wanted to ask one question
Yeah.
about your campaign.
Yeah.
So, you've been involved in a number of SRC and USU election campaigns, as you've mentioned, and it appears that your current campaign for the fellow position draws on these experiences with things like, online campaign messaging and the flyers. Given that students have already been subjected to 2 highly visible elections this year, and that Senate elections aren't usually as hotly contested, how do you plan to engage students with these elections?
Good question. It's really, really important. I love elections. I think all students should love elections. Elections are so important for our university experience, and so important for students to be engaged with elections, because that means they get the representative into these positions that they want and who will actually represent them. So it is really, really important that students engage with the elections, and how I plan to get them engaged is by talking to them, approaching them, listening to them, hearing them out, and then, taking notes. Because if I take notes now, my memory can only serve me so far. And so if I take notes now, I'll be sure to bring those in if elected to those meetings.
Sure. And a quick follow-up question to that, especially with the physical elements such as the flyers, how is your campaign being funded?
It's personal.
Okay.
Yeah.
Alright, so just to wrap up, so the current student fellows who ran on a moderate Liberal ticket have recently attracted scrutiny for their ability to fulfil their election promises, as well as their lack of involvement in student advocacy campaigns such as the fight against the 12-week semesters last year and the 5-day simple extensions reform this year. So considering that you do come from a similar sort of political faction as them, to what extent do you agree with their approach, and then to what extent do you differentiate yourself?
I can't speak to. I don't necessarily know what went on in the boardroom, so I can't speak to their strategy and their plan and how they've acted on some of their promises. But how I will differentiate myself is my door will always be open, and I'm sure there has been too. But I'm happy to speak to students on all issues and be providing them regular updates with the progress that I make. And as I said before, I've made a commitment to making sure that I speak to students and always speak to students, and one of the avenues to do that is making sure that I make it to those SRC meetings and hear what our student representatives have to say.
Sure. And last question, in one sentence, why should students vote for you above any other candidates?
Have a look at all the other candidates. The future of our education really matters, and it's important that we have a really good, strong student representative on the board. And with both my experience and my plan for the future, I'd really appreciate your vote, and hopefully I can continue to listen to you and fight for you.
Great, thank you.
Might have been 3 sentences, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's so fine. Yeah, so that's all of my questions. Did you want to say anything else before I let you go?
No, fabulous. That was wonderful.
Yeah.
All good.
Perfect.